Hi, everybody. Welcome. Today is typically Tuesdays with Kamira, but I am subbing in for her. So it's Sue Borison here and glad to be with all of you. Today we are in for a treat. We have Jen Cort back with us. She's a social worker, a teacher, a school administrator, and now her focus is on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And you're predominantly doing consulting work with schools and organizations, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the big news today is Jen has just released a new book called Help Us Begin, Hub Strategies, HUB for Help Us Begin, Hub Strategies and Mindsets for Meaningful Conversations with Kids, especially when you are challenged by the topic. And I also want to say we have a few copies, so if you would like to be entered into the raffle, email editor@yourteenmag.com, and I'm going to put that in the comments in a minute. I want to start with the obvious, like we're 2 days away from the holiday that has the most travel in any point in the year, which means that people get together, and we get together with people hopefully that we love, but maybe not always that we agree with.
Yes.
And that could be friends or family. So from your lens of the work you do and the book you just put out there, what's your suggestion for people who are like right now starting to get a little anxious about what they envision Thursday Thanksgiving meal to be?
Yeah. It's such a good question. And I've been thinking, thank you for having me back. I've been thinking about this a lot because it's a conversation that keeps coming up and has been for the last few years. People are saying, what do we do at the Thanksgiving table? And I know some folks say no politics. Some folks say yes politics. And the way I think about it is whatever you've been doing, if it hasn't worked, do something else. But also there's before, during, and after. Before, have a conversation with everyone in your family, and of course the family is whatever you define it to be, about what they're looking forward to and what they're nervous about or uncomfortable with or dreading. And then think about what you could do in those moments so that it's very much saying to your kids, for example, or your partner, I've got you, like, here's our plan. We're going to work on something together. In the moment, avoid confirmation bias. And that might be when, you know that the one person in your family is going to say the same thing and it's always going to upset you. So don't look for that to happen. Look for any change that's possible. So now we're moving into during. Another one is to hug someone you love in the moment. The science shows that a longer hug, 10 seconds or so, actually reduces blood pressure and heart rate. So small things, but big things. In the moment.
So the person who's annoying you, or just in general, when you see people, you hug them?
See people, you hug them. Like, okay. I know one of my students said, we talked about this last year, and he said, yeah, so my mom, whenever she walked in the room, I just give her a big hug and she would whisper, are you okay? And I would say yes or no, or, whatever we need. And then that was his thing. It was a way to ground him. He got some love. She was checking in with him. But then there's also subjects that we bring up that are habitual that are not necessary and can also cause a lot of stress, particularly for kids at different ages. So, for example, I have an 11th grader. And one of the things I know people will ask at Thanksgiving is, what are the plans for after graduation? I also have a senior in college, and I know people will ask, are you getting a job? So I will talk to my kids about, are those questions okay? And if they're not, I'm going to say, hey, we're just focusing on right now. So whenever people ask them, because that alone can be very triggering in terms of getting our anxiety going. And then this is a small thing, but it fundamentally changed one of our family gatherings. We all just brought boxes of our old pictures, not the albums that were all put together beautifully and everything, but just boxes of pictures. And we just went through the pictures. Oh, remember this, remember that. And it helped us to see each other. And then lastly, I would say that it is important for kids to not live in an echo chamber, kids of all ages. They need to see adults in their lives being able to disagree with each other without dismantling their relationship. So not avoiding altogether, but figuring out what you could do to help you in those moments. So you can disagree some, but when that physical location of feelings, that part of your body that signals your anxiety gets going, then it's time to remove yourself.
So there's a few things in that one of them I love, because I think it's so obvious, and yet who can do it? if it didn't work last time, don't do it again this time. And
Yeah.
yet we're creatures of habit. We just kind of go back into the situation and repeat it. So how do we not do that is a big deal. And also, when you said it's good for our kids to see us dealing with conflict, we suck at it too. So like, I don't know that it's great for our kids to see that. I think you're assuming we can do better, and I don't know how to. So how, if I'm listening and I think, well, I have that aspirationally, but I fail every time. How do I do that? So you have a lot of, like, you brought up physical location of feelings in your book, and you mentioned it now. And I love that idea. So before you answer the questions I just gave you, let's talk about what that is. Cause you gave an example of a kid that I loved. So what is physical location of feelings?
So the physical location of feelings, I call it PLOF, is the part of our body that gets activated when our brains or our feelings become anxious, or we feel vulnerable, or we feel scared in any way. The brain signals that part of the body. That part of the body tries to get us out of that, whatever we're in. So it's very much rooted in the limbic system, the really ancient part of the brain. It goes back to everything is great or everything is dangerous. And it doesn't understand that there's a middle range where it's not great or dangerous, but it's just a little bit tense, a little bit uncomfortable, but that's where growth happens. Everyone has a physical location of feelings. Many of us do not know what it is because we've been taught over time to diminish it and to not listen to it. So an easy trick is if you do anything that calms the central nervous system, such as mindfulness or breathing, deep breathing or meditation or anything like that, check in with where you're feeling that in your body. Or if you, next time you're in a stressful situation or an even slightly uncomfortable situation, look for where you're feeling it in your body, because it's always signaling to us. And it starts off very quiet, but it's had the privilege of deciding a lot of things for us. And we want to take back that control.
I think it's so interesting, because my assumption before I read your book was that everybody has the reaction I do. Like, I can feel my heart rate increasing. Like, I feel like my blood pressure just keeps doing that. But you told the story of a kid that I loved who didn't exactly know where his location was, but he acted it out for you.
Yeah, so he kept kicking things and kind of shuffling his feet and kind of knocking things with his shoes, not hard or anything like that, just like when a kid's kind of looking down, shuffling their feet. And I asked him if it's what his feet would say to me if they could talk right now. And he said that I'd like to kick someone. And so that's his physical location of feelings. It shows up for him in his feet. I know another student that was kept doing kind of hand movements. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't get it. And I was like, what would your hands say? And he was like, that I want to squeeze someone. So for him, it's the hands, and it's different for everybody. Some people, I shouldn't say it's different for everyone. Some people have the same, but it can be as as distance as our feet, and we don't think about listening to that part of our body. And interestingly, he's in college now, and one of the things he told me was that he noticed that he often wants to walk out of rooms when things are difficult, and so he's linking that together.
Wow. So his feet really do the talking. That's amazing.
Not
I love
surprising.
that.
He's a college soccer player.
So what happens when we get to the point, which I think probably isn't so challenging right now, like you just pay attention to it and you'll recognize where it is in your body. What do we do with that information?
So then we need to think about ways to help to calm it, help to take care of it. And we know I'm a research nerd. And if you read my book, it's not a research book, but I'm always citing what studies and things that people have offered from their expertise. We know that in self-care, and during COVID, self-care became kind of it felt like a demand, like, don't forget self-care. And a lot of teachers were like, I can't do that. Yeah. So, want to think about when we're engaging in self-care, we often stop after one or two things, and we need to do more and think about all of our senses. So we know that if we think about the things we like to wear or hold in our hands, that's texture. If we think about what we like to drink and what we like to eat, of course, all of those, but then we want to think about temperature, the temperature around us and the temperature of food or drinks, because all of those send signals to our brain that we're taking care of ourselves. And then we can consolidate them and make like a little kit to bring with you. So for example, one of the one of the tastes I love is citrus, anything sour. I love anything sour. And I know that that's also a smell that helps me to feel comfortable. So I have on my desk a little thing of lemon oil. And right before this interview, because I get nervous, I put it on my hands and gave myself a smell of it. And then I'm also drinking lemon tea. Both of those things are alerting my taste, the sense of flavor, temperature, taste, smell, and I'm signaling to myself that I'm taking care of myself. And none of these things are going to fix everything, but anytime we can add one new piece to our repertoire, the better off we are.
I think also, so it's figuring out what your lemon scent is for you, but also it does buy you a little bit of time having something to do. Yeah. So, sometimes like we might react too quickly to something that happens, and even having, and like, if you hadn't reacted 5 minutes later, you'd know that was a bad idea, but you reacted too quickly. So opening up your jar and preparing your tea, maybe all of that gives you a little pause too.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the question around when we're in conflict, of course, we don't want to go, thank you for asking that clarifying question. We don't want to go and have a big, huge debate and disagreement in front of our kids. But it is important for kids to not grow up in echo chambers where everyone agrees and feels the same way, because they don't learn those muscles of really listening. And frankly, I would say for us to live in those environments, because many of us need to have experience with that. But there are some strategies you can use in that moment. One, listen to Ploff. Two, use one sentence. When we are stressed or anxious, we tend to fill space with words. We just go on and on and on and on. And we know from linguistics that most people are listening to respond. And within the first little bit of what you're saying, we've decided what we're going to say next. So if you use one sentence, it forces you to stop and listen. And then in that moment, when you're listening, you can ask yourself, is this too much for me? Because if it is, then say, okay, we've taken this conversation as far as we can take it for right now. Let's go do something else. I don't know if that supports the question you're asking.
Well, no, that is the question I'm asking. I'm just wondering, like, I could see someone going, oh, so you're done. Like that. It kind of could exacerbate it when it could come off as dismissive. So how do we phrase that in a way that isn't?
So I like to think of subtle to strong. So some people will pick up on subtle cues of somebody saying to them, just changing the subject. You're having a tense conversation and you say, how's work going? Some people pick up on that. So that's great. If they do, then you stop there. But if they don't, then you go to you're going all the way to the most firm thing you need to say. In my case, I would say, I think this conversation has gone as far as it can go right now. I love you. I want us to have a conversation about this later. Let's schedule a time. But in between there, you're increasing the strength of the messages so that you are both getting your feet underneath you and you can see where the other person is. And that's my script that I'm going to use for somebody I love. If that comes up, not everyone would say I love you, and we'll continue it later. But so you would save those kinds of firm comments for after you've tried other things. Of course, if the conversation's really tense and it just starts off that tense, then you don't think of it as a 1 to 5 with subtle to really firm, subtle being 1 and firm being 5. You'd start off at a 3 or 4. But most times there's a build up to it.
So the message for me, and I hope for people listening, by the way, if you're listening and you have any particular questions for Jen, just put them in the comments. But for me, I'm going to literally be done with this call and think of what's my sentence.
Yeah.
Because I feel like at that moment, my body is reacting, my brain isn't. And so if I can have the sentence prepared, I can just say, so is everyone ready for dessert? Or whatever it is, right? Like, yeah, we've just had the appetizer and I'm going to go, how about dessert?
Yeah. Well, and there's also interesting research around that when we have a task to complete and we say done, it actually sends a message to our brain, like you can accomplish something even in a stress moment. So assigning tasks to people is helpful. Things that I think about are, doing side-by-side stuff. And I talk about this a lot in the book of having side-by-side activities so you don't have to sit and face each other. So I know a family where the dad is an amazing cook. He could do Thanksgiving dinner on a Sunday morning easily. But he assigns everyone tasks to complete when they're there. So, he says, like, you're going to be bringing in wood, you're going to be chopping vegetables. Everyone has a job that they're going to do when they're there. So it makes it, one of the things he said is that it makes it so that everyone's not in one place at one time. And you can kind of like settle into, you're chopping something, you can just lose yourself in that for a moment. And he said they've been doing that since the 2016 election cycle, and have loved it. When you talked about one sentence, to me, I also think about scripting, which is where when there's a conversation that might come up, or somebody might say a certain kind of thing that gets you, or anything that's caused distress or might cause distress, think ahead of time about what you want to communicate and make all of those words into one sentence and practice that sentence so that in that moment you have a script ready to use. And I always say with hubs, I wish one of them worked on a whole lot of things, but usually we have to combine them with multiple hubs for us to have, opportunity to be able to affect change in our relationships with each other.
Okay, so the other thing is, we have these pre-existing expectations, and I think you I don't know if it's the same thing, but you talk about shortcuts in your book, and to me, it's like we finish the story with only a little bit of data.
Yeah.
Right. And so, first of all, I'd love to hear your story about the shark and the dolphin with your son, and then we'll talk more about that.
Yeah. So, Neurological Shortcuts, this is building off the work of Scott Barry Kaufman. It's the idea that our brain has almost like a filing system within it. And shortcuts are designed for efficiency. Think of how hard it might have been to teach a child how to tie their shoes. But once they learn, they never have to think about it again. And that's because they've developed a shortcut for it. So the thing about shortcuts is they don't care about our values or our ethics. They don't ask our moral code about how we tie our shoes. And so we'll take snippets of information from experiences we may or may not have had and create a response, because the brain wants to have a response right away. So I have many examples of my shortcuts, but the one that I refer to in the book is on sharks and dolphins. My oldest is a scuba diver, and he was given the immense privilege of diving in an aquarium. He was 14, much taller than me. He was like, I can go by myself. And I said, no, I got to sign forms. So I was really glad to be able to go. There were a bunch of people my age and my son and the dive instructor. And he explained everything and then said, anyone have any questions? And as I said in Hubs, my son's not somebody who's yelled at us, but his silence sometimes is almost like screaming at us. And I imagined it echoing around the building. But I said, the tank that you're going to put them in has sharks and the other one has dolphins. Can he swim with the dolphins? They're so cute. And I don't want him swimming with the sharks. And the dive instructor and I know nothing about diving, but I had decided when he introduced himself that he was highly qualified, because my shortcuts of highly qualified were years of experience, being a teacher, winning awards. And he had checked off all those boxes when he introduced himself. So he said, don't let your child swim with a dolphin in an aquarium. Always let him swim with sharks in an aquarium. And then I thought, my shortcuts, never being a diver, never being around dolphins or sharks, I decided everything that I thought was his qualifications before, now I thought he was inept and incompetent and probably a whole bunch of other things. And I tried to imagine, could I drag my child out of there? But then he explained, dolphins swim in an up and down motion. They're very muscular. They're very curious about people. They get high rates of speed, and they will smash, he said, they will smash your child up against the glass and break his sternum. Sharks swim more like a snake. They're largely skeletal. They have very little interest in people unless they're hungry and we feed them. And he said, in fact, if your son bumps into them, they're probably just going to move out of the way. And so then I had to change completely. And that's how quickly new shortcuts can form. The challenge there was that I had the benefit of him explaining it to me. And a lot of times we don't. We just have this system in our head. You didn't meet my criteria. I've decided you are wrong or bad or incompetent or mean or whatever. So now, then I watched my son swimming with sharks and he had a great time. He bumped into a shark. It moved out of his way. It was pretty easy, but it was a good reminder to me and an anchor that I hold on to. He's now 21 and I still think, is this my shark or is this my dolphin?
And when I read it, I thought, if I'm applying this to like Thanksgiving, for example, and
Yes.
I know that somebody's going to bring up a topic in the news that's not going to go well, I've already I've already taken that whole story to its end. In
Mhm.
fact, so much so when that person starts to talk, if it even sounds like we might be talking about something in the news,
Mhm.
I react. I can already feel myself like, I want to leave. I want to get out of here. This
Yeah.
is about to happen, right? So that story to me was cautionary. Like, maybe that's not even what he's going to say today, right? Maybe it's not even coming up.
Yeah, and well, we can also use, if we go back to that continuum of subtle to more forceful. We could even, if it's a conversation like you said that comes up every year, it might be interesting to say, when we talked about this last year, I'm wondering if you have any new thoughts on it. So it's like signaling to them, you have to be careful because sometimes they'll give you all the thoughts. But if the conversation is going to happen, you might signal to them, let's take it with new information. But also think about the hot spots in your family. I know our hot spot is the dining room table when we have everyone over for holidays. And so doing things at the table can be helpful. Like I started putting little games on the table and little cards that had funny questions on them, just to help us focus on something that was not, politics, etc. Putting pictures on little stands in front of people is always fun, and you can tell those stories. And like I said before, anything you've done that hasn't worked, try something else.
So I don't know where this was in your book, but it was basically things that don't help when the
Yeah.
temperature's already always rising. And the
Yeah.
one that really stood out for me was calm down.
Yeah.
Why doesn't that work?
So I've asked 100, I have the privilege of working with a lot of kids. And by kids, I mean everyone, under the age of 21. And I asked a lot of them, what are some of the things that I always like to ask? What do you think adults don't know or misunderstand? And what do you wish adults would hear from you? And over and over again, kids said, I don't know any human being who's been told to calm down when they're stressed. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. They're things that we know. So saying calm down is not helpful. Saying, what can I help you in this moment? How can I help you in this moment is helpful. So recognizing the feeling and partnering is very different than just telling anyone how they feel. Others that kids brought up over and over again, there were a lot, but the ones that kind of rose to the top were things like, I know how you feel, or telling them how they feel. Or saying things like, one kid said, when I'm on my phone in front of everyone in the family, that's because I'm checking with my friends so I can survive that moment. And so when other adults are like, in my house, we don't have phones out, is different than, if families say, okay, let's have this time be a no phone zone. So maybe they're off doing something on their phone for a little while, but then maybe they're not. So really thinking about the language we're using, but that calmed down. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, I've said that to people. And I also know how annoyed I get when people say it to me because
So,
everything's going.
but so much of that is how we were spoken to and just culturally language that we use.
Yeah.
How hard is it to undo that? Like if that's the way your dynamic is, and you say to somebody who's yelling, hey, calm down,
Mm-hmm.
I know it can actually be inflaming to the other person, but what's the instead?
So, and this is one of those things, if your go-to is to say calm down, it's going to take you a little while to break that habit. And shamed brains can't learn. So we don't want to put all the shame on ourselves, but this is another place we can be proactive, and we can say to people, one thing I want to eliminate from my vocabulary is telling people to calm down. So if you hear me say that, please just remind me in a nice way. I'm practicing doing that. That models making mistakes. It models learning as a continuum. It's not I've just decided I'm not going to do this. And it empowers kids and our partners and more to be in partnership with us, to be able to say, hey, that thing you said you were working on, that just happened. Instead of, think about it, it's an amplified situation. You tell them to calm down, and then somebody else goes, you weren't going to say calm down anymore. That's not going to help either. So making some agreements ahead of time, And one thing that I think is helpful is for everyone in the family to say one thing they're working on and how family members can support them in those moments. So that, does it feel good to have a nonverbal cue? Does it feel helpful to remind someone? I know one of my students said the other day that he's going to ask whenever somebody in his family says something that they're working on not saying, he's going to ask, do they like pineapple? And I was like, why? And he goes, because it's random. It'll stop them and go, why are you asking? Like, it stops the moment. So I can't wait to hear how that goes.
I think about my own family and how much they would resist having that conversation, but you have kids in a classroom or, in a different setting than home.
Yeah.
Do you ever find that there are kids that don't want to join in your game? They're like, well, that's stupid. Or yeah.
Yeah, I teach human students, so yes, definitely. So with that, I'm joking only because I always say, like, when we make mistakes, we're human, educating humans, being raised by humans. So what I like to do is create menus. So you create a menu of responses, a menu of things you could do in that moment. And they come up with some things and you come up with some things. And then they pick one to try. And if that works, great. And if it doesn't, they try another. But you want them to co-construct the menu with you and then talk about what would be helpful. So some of my students last year, what they were doing, this was around graduation, that we were having a lot of these conversations. These were text threads that they were having with family instead of actually talking with them. Just depends on your family ethos about that. But I like to give choice within options. And so thinking about, here's a conversation we need to have. You're saying we need to have this conversation, but would you like to have it in your room or somewhere else? Would you like to have it before dinner or after dinner? So you're giving choice, but the choice is within options that you can support. Not just saying, what do you want to do? And then kids come up with something that you can't do. And you go, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Then that creates distrust between them and us.
Okay, really good ideas. We're going to end with the best one you're holding on to. What's your best tip for getting through the holiday season with joy?
With joy. That's
I added that. Sorry, I added that.
The best tips that I can think of are to use code words. So code words are when if you and I were in a situation together, I might say to you, Susan, if I come up to you and ask you, do you like pineapple? That's a code to you that I'm having a hard time. And then I get to get out of that situation. Also to remember why you're there and that we can love people and not agree with them. And that doesn't mean we have to take everything that they're saying, but we can have some elasticity in our relationship. And then also really thinking about how you balance the calendar. So if your family is one that has activities every weekend for all of December, asking folks, and this can be done over, Google Chat or a Google document even, or sharing the calendar. What are some things that are going to be harder for you and what are some things that are going to be easier for you so that because we don't know and we often assume. And then also to do as much as we can to help support our PLOF so that it doesn't decide for us, because after the holidays, we're still living with ourselves and our PLOF.
Okay, I don't know if I can say it. PLOF, physical location of feelings, our PLOF. We're going to make that an acronym that takes over. Everyone knows it. Jen Cort, thank you so much. I hope whatever comes up at your table, you navigate it well. And I hope the same for everyone listening and myself.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a privilege to be in this space. And I would love if folks come up with ideas on, that you've tried and they've worked well. I'd love to see those because I'm always writing and will love to incorporate your ideas with your name, of course, attached to them.
Stephanie says, thank you, ladies. Happy Thanksgiving. Back at you, Stephanie. Take care, everybody.